Oh, thank you. I forgot the one thing they told me to remember. Good thing I'm loud, right? Okay. So anyway, with financial services, it's all about auto loans and helping customers be able to purchase cars, service those loans, and do the whole thing that have to do with cars. I'm not a car owner yet. I've lived in a city for over 10 years, so I really haven't had to have a car. But a couple of other professional pieces about me, and then a little bit of a personal story in terms of how I came here today before I get started. I like to write and quote at conferences a lot. Some pieces that you may have seen me write is by People Nerds. I've written for them. They are sort of the blogging arm of D-Scout, which is a diary study platform, and then also Smashing Magazine. I wrote about ethical research practices and how to build an ethical research practice at any organization, as well as how to drive and document impacts from research. Because a lot of what we do in industry is driving impact with the research that we conduct, not just building a body of knowledge to do research just to do research. I am also guest lecturer and critic for Carnegie Mellon University. A little bit about me, back in 2019, I was doing some research for Verizon on 5G, which will be a big topic of my talk today. And I did research here in Indianapolis. I actually was gallivanting around the suburbs, watching our technicians install home internet, and learning a whole lot about this beautiful city as part of it. I am not originally from Indianapolis. I'm originally from Western Michigan, moved and lived and worked in Chicago for 4.5 years before then moving me and my husband to New York to pursue an opportunity at Verizon. I then went to the Interaction 19 conference where I met Poppy and a few other alumni from Indiana University. And they showed me a great time around Indianapolis when I came back for even more research for 5G. Fell in love, heard that we're doing Indy Design Week in person this year. I decided to come and be a part of it in person and bring my husband along. He's in the museum. I think he went to the one that has a lot of the Native American exhibits. He walked across the Little River Walk today. He went to Indy Coffee. Absolute phenomenal place here in Carmel. So thank you so much for having me again. Let's get started. What I'm going to talk about is 5G and emerging trends coming out of the pandemic. But these emerging trends and the sort of creation of 5G technology is actually fueling something else much bigger. It's fueling the fourth industrial revolution, which is really the heart of what I'm going to talk about today. The fourth industrial revolution is something that will change the way that we work and the way that we live and the way that we show up in our practice at design. It does not matter if you're an interior designer, a product designer, or a user experience designer. This will impact you. And my hope today, if you take nothing away from this talk, is to just learn a little bit more about how it might impact you. The things to keep in mind about how our industry will shift, how consumer needs have already shifted, and how the expectations of businesses and how we show up in tomorrow's society also will change. And the two cornerstones of that is talking about these consumer trends coming out of the pandemic, and as well as talking about the 5G technology that is fueling these innovations. So, what is the fourth industrial revolution? Well, let's learn about looking ahead by looking back. Let's look back at the past. The first industrial revolution, 1760, is roughly when people say that it happened. And that was powered by steam. This was the innovations that led away from hand-tooled work. Imagine a scythe and you're cutting down corn in the cornfields, and now it's a machine that comes and does it for you. Think about locomotives. Think about all the innovations that led to the first machines. This is the era of the machine, the first industrial revolution. Now, then 100 years later, in 1860, the second industrial revolution happens, and that is powered by electricity. The birth of the light bulb and the era of manufacturing. Now things that were done kind of efficiently by steam-powered machines can now be done on a massive scale. These are things like the assembly line were created. Things like mass manufacturing that led to innovations that we stand on today. And then the third industrial revolution. Now this one we may forget about because it feels like it just happened, and that's because it did. This one actually began in 1940 with the introduction of the Turing machine, which is one of the first of its kind computers. And then that led to the creation of the modern day computer, and then the laptop. and then the World Wide Web. The third industrial revolution is the creation and curation of digital platforms, digitization, and standardization. And you may ask, wait, aren't we still living and breathing that today? Yes, I think we're just riding off of the third industrial revolution and into a new one. We are moving into the fourth industrial revolution, which is all about fusion. Mobile technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, everything that you've heard about for the past few years, it's really coming true now in a bigger way than ever before. And part of it is because of the two big topics that I will be talking about, 5G and emerging trends specifically coming out of the pandemic. But what is fusion in terms of the fourth industrial revolution? It is the confluence of digital platforms and environments mixing with physical platforms and environments. I'm wearing an Apple Watch. There's wearables such as like Google Glass that have come and gone, but now there are talks of bringing it back. There's Internet of Things, and the world in which we live will continue to be further enmeshed with the digital products that we use to augment ourselves as people, to make our jobs and our lives easier, to track our health. Those things are becoming more paramount than they ever were before. And so I wanted to start, it's a big meaty quote by the World Economic Forum. I will butcher it if I don't read it verbatim, so let me just read it for you here. The possibilities of billions of people connected by mobile devices with unprecedented processing power, storage capacity, and access to knowledge are unlimited. Engineers, designers, and architects, that's all of us, combining computational design, additive manufacturing, materials engineering, and synthetic biology to pioneer the symbiosis of microorganisms, our bodies, the products we consume, and even the buildings we inhabit. Now, if you're like me, I read it and I thought, oh shit, that sounds like everything. It's because it is. Let's read one by Salesforce. The fourth industrial revolution is a way of describing the blurring of boundaries between the physical, digital, and biological worlds. It's a fusion of advances in artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, genetic engineering, quantum computing, and other technologies. I read these two quotes because I think they really bring home just how blurry things will get. And so as we think about the impact, what does that mean for us as designers and how we show up in our everyday lives, in our everyday work, as we show up on Monday in our day jobs, thinking about how this will affect us. Things will get blurry. We need to embrace ourselves for a more interconnected world where context is paramount and micro moments should be deeply cared for. We're going to unpack micro moments a little bit further, but really what that means is solving for the big rocks or the big problems in the customer's journey, or thinking about sort of large messages that you want to get across if you're a communications designer or graphic designer. That's good. That's great. We need to keep fighting for that. But that's becoming table stakes. Thinking about specialized segments and specific communities of consumers, thinking about micro interactions and moments that matter are becoming far more important because those are being expected by consumers today, especially with some of the trends that I'll be sharing with you coming out of the pandemic in terms of screen time habits and usage. But let's talk about the first topic, 5G. Well, what is 5G? Isn't that just faster 4G? Well, maybe. 5G is defined by Ericsson. Ericsson is a creator of 5G technology. They actually build the fiber optic networks that then are leased to companies like Verizon to then help build out the networks based on FCC guidelines. Before I read this quote by Ericsson, just a bit of background. Verizon and T-Mobile and AT&T are all building fiber optic cables across the entire country to build this new technology. 5G is not a flip of the switch. It is not a software update. It is an entirely new infrastructure that needs to be built from the feet up. And we can only do that with certain approvals by the FCC. Now, you may have heard millimeter spectrum or mid-band spectrum. All of that's still gibberish to me. It's probably a lot of gibberish to you. But in essence, we Verizon gets, I keep using the royal we because I just left Verizon about 5 weeks ago. So anyway, but the companies that build these networks, they get approval in order to build them over time. They got approval earlier last year. They've lit up over 20 million homes and consumer-based cities across the United States just in the past year. And by late 2023, early 2024, most of the country will be covered by 5G. So what was once this sort of fleeting fancy, this idea of this new technology maybe coming around the corner, it's here now, and it's being built. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how that might affect us as designers and us as consumers. But let's start with this. 5G is the 5th generation of cellular networks. 5G runs on the same radio frequencies that are currently being used by your smartphone, on Wi-Fi networks and in satellite communications, but it enables technology to go a lot further. So let's unpack that a little bit more with some use cases after some data, of course. I looked at this presentation as I naturally would a researcher, and so I did a lot of sort of secondary research. So I'm going to, throughout the presentation, I'll provide you with a little bit of sound bites and data. 5G is 100 times faster than 4G technology. To really put this in perspective, we talked a lot when I worked at Verizon about use cases. Consumers are like, okay, speed, yeah, okay, that's nice. But my phone works faster. Let me just really bring this home for you. Anybody use Uber or Lyft? Raise your hand. Probably all of us, or at least have used it once before. That was not possible before 4G. You literally couldn't open your phone and load the website or mobile apps fast enough to even watch a car come to you in real time or get real-time push notifications for when it arrived. It just physically was not possible. Companies, huge behemoths like Uber, did not even exist before that technology was here. Imagine what that means for tomorrow when 5G technology is 100 times faster than what we have now. What will that enable? It's zero latency time. How many of you have experienced lag in a Zoom conference call with distributed colleagues and you're like, oh, you're frozen. Oh, I think we got a lag going on. Anybody? Yeah, I thought so. Imagine that you'll be able to talk with distributed colleagues as easily as I'm talking to you now, in literally real time. Being able to see every micro expression they make, react to your conversations, be able to work more efficiently in meetings. Now, when we look at 2023, you may be thinking, okay, well, 5G is maybe a solution looking for a problem, right? Maybe it's consumers are not ready. It is projected that in 2023, 69% of smartphones will be 5G smartphones. That's huge. I'm going to tweak this a little bit and say that's like almost 70%. Come on, 69%. That's the majority, the vast majority of the country will be ready for this technology. And the FCC regulations, by allowing 5G to be rolled out by companies like Verizon, they'll be mostly rolled out by the end of next year anyway. So now you have the business and the policies that are enabling this technology. Now the consumers that have the phones that can power this technology, they're coming together as early as next year. Here are a couple use cases to really bring this home and really bring it home for us as design practitioners. Enhanced building operations. Forbes says that 5G may enable pinpoint location accuracy in high bandwidth applications like 4K streaming. What does that do for when you walk into a conference room? It knows who you are, where you are, and it knows you got a Zoom meeting that you need to jump into in the next few minutes, and it powers everything for you and stands it up for you in minutes. You're not sitting here dialing into a billion numbers. You're not here trying to jump on calls with distributed colleagues. It's there and it's active and it's ready. So no one's late for meetings, everyone's more efficient. Imagine for real estate brokerages or the building engineers being able to save millions of dollars year over year because, for example, if you look around here, there's not a whole lot of folks over in that room over there. Maybe on the other side of the building, there's nobody, but the lights are still on. We're still paying for that overhead cost and electricity to power the building, keep the water supply going, keep the air filtrating. But maybe we don't have to. Maybe the parts that are uninhabited by the building because of the increase in distributed work means that we can save on those costs. So what does that mean in terms of if you want to start a company and have, I heard earlier, dreams of having a team under you, maybe you have a little studio. What does that mean for your your cost month over month for operating that business. They drastically go down because the operations become more efficient. Internet of Things. So when we think about Internet of Things, a technology blog online called Make Use Of, they talk about low-powered devices. This was fascinating to me. The idea that 5G has a potential to deliver power to low-powered devices, such as sensors, such as an Apple Watch, such as the new Apple AirTag that you may have seen. Imagine, as a product designer for small devices, maybe even one day your cell phone, you don't need to worry about designing for a power port. You don't have to worry about perhaps designing for such large batteries that have to retain so much power because they're constantly being charged by the wireless technology that surrounds us. What would that enable us to do when we don't have to recharge batteries all the time or sit there and wait for things on end? How much more efficient can these devices get? And how much more creative can we be as product designers if any of us work on physical products? But one thing that you'll hear a whole lot about in terms of revolutionizing industries is just how speed alone and latency alone can drastically change the way that people work and the way that people live. As Verizon puts it, with high speed, low latency, and capacity, 5G millimeter wave, which is the fastest spectrum of 5G technology, could enable drone delivery, cloud-connected traffic control, and allow applications to live up to their true potential. From emergency response to global payments, next-gen gaming, possibilities are limitless. A few examples for you. My husband is a commercial interior designer. He designs workplaces for offices. His firm might design something like this. With the advent of kind of like newer technologies, they've been able to create photorealistic 3D renderings for clients. Let's say SAP wanted to redesign their entire office spaces. They decided to hire his firm. They would show photorealistic renderings of what new materials and finishes may look like, what a new layout would look like. And then clients would give approval and the typical design process would ensue. But when you create those photorealistic renderings, it takes hours, sometimes days, because it creates huge, massive computers to run the processing power for all the 3D modeling that goes into an entire space like this that's at scale. Imagine doing that in minutes in the cloud, where I can show you on an iPad, like I'm doing here, what it may look like in different materials. Go grab a coffee, come back, and now we've redesigned your entire space in minutes time. What does that do for the design process for an interior designer? What about the future of service design when you're working? I worked with several designers at Verizon who were in service design departments focused on customer service. When someone was struggling to install their home internet themselves, because we had self-service options, we always had to send someone to their house. That annoys the customer because now you have to wait and schedule half your day to wait for someone to come in and install. And now the technician has to go, so it's more cost in the business. Imagine if you could pull up your phone and use augmented reality where the person can point at all the areas that you need to work on, install, press this button, do this, do that. We're doing that now. That's not a sort of futuristic thought that's happening right now. And it will become more efficient and more prevalent when we think about 5G technology. 5G isn't just another tech innovation, it's a platform that makes other innovations possible. What's the next big topic? COVID-19. All of us have been affected by COVID-19. But specifically, as we take a look back and look at some of the macro trends, we may have individual examples of how it has affected each of us. But how has it affected society in the way that we work, the way that we operate, and the way that we live? Here's a really good quote by McKinsey. They say that the fault lines between industries and business models that we understood intellectually before the COVID-19 crisis have now become giant fissures, separating the old reality from the new one. Just as an earthquake produces a sudden release of pent-up force, the economic shock set off by the pandemic has accelerated and intensified trends that are already underway. Now, I think two really important words here are fissures and acceleration. We'll talk about why that's important in a minute, but long and short of it is, if we're not careful, the introduction of this new technology, the acceleration of these trends, could cause huge fissures on a socioeconomic level that we'll talk about. The poor become poorer, the rich become richer. Those with technology are more equipped and more privileged, and those without are left behind. That's the fissure. Acceleration meaning with every industrial revolution, there always comes with a cost in terms of jobs that could be lost. And reskilling and upskilling becomes paramount. It happened before, it'll happen again. And it will happen in the next revolution. But let's talk about that a little bit more. 21% increase in national consumer screen time, over 49% increase in internet traffic and data used across the United States and in Canada, and a decrease in 48% commercial property real estate investment. These are data points coming out of the pandemic that describe a far more connected world than we've ever had before, and one in which distributed work is far more important as you see the commercial property investment going down. Maybe we don't need such large offices anymore. Maybe we need a different type of office experience. Now, when you talk to business experts, what does this mean for the future of small businesses or large businesses and enterprises? 11% of business experts that were interviewed believe that current business models are viable. Well, shit, that means 89% do not think that their business models will be viable in the future. That's a problem. But 64% believe that new digital businesses are needed in order to remain competitive in today's world, in today's interconnected world that will only be more and more interconnected tomorrow. We've all heard the buzzword personalization. As Harvard Business Review says, brands must communicate on very local and precise terms, targeting specific consumers based on their circumstances and what is most relevant to them. The customer expects more than a seamless digital transaction. Now that companies have their personal data, they want anticipatory, personalized experiences across the entire journey. Now, for communications and marketing designers and graphic designers out there, what does that mean in terms of making sure that the message that you are tailoring is highly personalized towards the customers that you're supporting? It may be not enough in the future to go after the entire country with your messaging, or go after an entire region. Knowing your customer and being able to tailor the message to them is becoming more paramount than ever. And for service designers or user experience designers, that means those micro interactions I talked about earlier become the place where you create differentiation. One word that really sticks out to me here is anticipatory. How do you go back to your job and think as a designer, how do we anticipate the needs of our customers and proactively meet them before they are needed? How do we show the customer that we have their back because we know them deeply? And distributed work. This was already talked about several times today. Inc. mentions that the way that we used to work is gone. We need to focus on the next normal and establishing new customs as well as expectations for what the workplace has become. Leaders need to consistently create more cross-functional work and curate digital forums that promote visibility and partnership. One of the things I really want to hone in on is the visibility and partnership. How many of you, before the pandemic, were one of the ones that maybe you took one day to work from home, you had something you just had to do, you had to call in, you couldn't understand a damn thing on the phone call because everybody was talking over themselves and it was just a big hot mess. Yeah? Let's hope that that doesn't happen again. As we have coworkers who will forever be remote, maybe we'll work with clients across different regions in the country, as we ourselves remain distributed, how do we all show up equitably? How do we make sure that our design process, the way that we work, the way that we do our work, builds equity for those who are distributed and those who are local? And I talked about this a little bit. Polarized socioeconomics. Research done by Pew suggests that the global pandemic, as it unfolds, experts fear growing social and racial inequality, worsening security and privacy, and the further spread of misinformation. McKinsey also suggests that with the current labor mismatch being felt in many countries, the time is now to further engage workers for a digitally enabled future. So allow me to be a little dark for a moment. This has really broad implications for making sure that the way that we show up as businesses in our design practices, I talked about equity, that we are showing up as a society that supports and fights against things like systemic racism, things like furthering the socioeconomic gap, and making sure that we show up in a way that promotes positive intent for the product and service that we deliver. Because there's a huge difference in what we've seen between knowledge workers and talent workers. There are people who've lost their jobs in the pandemic. My husband was one of them. And when we think about what does that do for many of us who might have been safe during that time, or at least more safe than others, who can work remotely, who work on their laptops, what does that do when we think about a fourth industrial revolution that will continue this trend? When we talk about touchless retail environments, walking into a McDonald's or an Amazon Go where there's not a person there, it's a robot, it's a kiosk. When we think about as the digital channel becomes more important and we're staffing a lot of UX designers and UX researchers, that's good for us, it's nice job security. But as the websites and products that we create become so easy to use and customers don't need to call in anymore, what does that do for the person at the call center that used to work 9 to 5 at a call center to feed their family? Now they're out of a job because they don't need as many call center representatives anymore. How do we make sure that we can show up for them and support them in any way that we can? Whether that is offering our knowledge that we have today at this conference to reskill and upskill folks who want to move into the UX field, get closer to tech, or whether it's considering a different alternative for departments that we're supporting within the companies that we work for. So being mindful of the positive intent of good technology, knowing that it's here to stay, but thinking about the impacts. In fact, if you'll indulge me, I think I have a few moments. In Interaction 19, Poppy and I sat through a beautiful segment that was called Below the Iceberg Thinking. And it's very similar to what I've been describing here. We as designers often like to sit here and sort of brainstorm and ideate new solutions to solve customer needs, but very seldom do we ideate on the ramifications of the products and services we're building. What could 5G bring, for example, that would worsen socioeconomic impact, increase poverty, decrease access to rural communities that may not have access to 5G technology? Maybe puts them further behind. Maybe it furthers the divide, gives people more privilege than they already had. Thinking about those things and brainstorming on those things allows us to anticipate them, plan for them, and design for them. So I challenge all of us to think about that in our everyday. So the impact, the hopes and fears of yesterday are realities of today. With the pandemic accelerating a lot of these nascent trends, expect to see major shifts in the way that we live and the way that we work. And expect to see greater socioeconomic impact, including trade versus knowledge workers. The longer that the economy is affected by COVID-19 measures, the more the wedge that will be driven between people who have continued working and those who are employed by impacted industries like tourism and events. I've already talked a lot about, okay, that's dark. What do we do? So in a typical design fashion, I've written a few how might we statements to get us thinking. I'm not here to prescribe any solutions. I'm here to prescribe the problem, and all of us will be part of the solution. So, how might we extend our knowledge to help narrow the potential socioeconomic gap? Taking all of the great insights that we've learned today from all the fantastic speakers earlier today and those that will come after me, and all the great conversations we're having, the skills that we're building. Is there an article you can write? Is there a conference you can talk at? Is there a conversation you can have to help inspire others who may be trying to get into this field as well? And how can you support them in doing that? How might we get closer to customers considering more context and touch points? Thinking about that hyper-personalization that I talked about earlier, how can we show up in our everyday work to think about those micro moments that matter so that way you can further differentiate your designs and your experiences from others? And how might we leverage fast real-time cloud computing to improve our personal work, our workflows, our processes, the technologies that we leverage as designers? Like the interior designer that I talked about, well, maybe you can do real-time cloud 3D rendering in minutes versus hours or days. If you could have something automate your process, make your life a little easier, what does that look like? And how could that change the world of design? I'll leave you with this quote. In its most pessimistic, dehumanized form, the fourth industrial revolution may indeed have the potential to robotize humanity and thus deprive us of our hearts and our souls. But as a complement to the best parts of human nature, creativity, empathy, and stewardship, it can lift humanity into a new collective and moral consciousness based on a shared sense of destiny. It is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that the latter prevails. Thank you.